Vanakkam everyone, I am Ruby Alice and I am happy to present today's talk in the Sindhi Poem Serapom series. Before I begin, I would like to once again thank all my subscribers and the viewers who've been regularly watching my podcasts and giving me your comments here as well as sending it to me privately. Thank you very much. Your encouraging words gives me the pleasure of making more such talks. Thank you. Today's talk, what is it going to be? I'll be talking about feminism in general, and in the talks that will follow, we'll probe the topic in detail. Why did I choose this topic? If you ask me that question, I would say that for a very long time I was intrigued by the crimes committed against women and the injustice meted out to women. This set me on a trail to find out why was this happening. Was it always like this? What are the reasons that women were denied a lot of rights? Why are men so hell-bent on making women feel so vulnerable? Questions like these need to be answered, for which I'd like to take you to the times that weren't recorded in history. A study on patriarchy suggests that society wasn't always like this. Initially, societies were matriarchal, that is, women were considered heads of a group. How do we know this? Researchers point out to many tribal communities which are yet untouched by civilization or modernization, which follow the matriarchal system. And even in cities, we see a lot of communities adhering to this matriarchal system, which proves that matriarchy was there initially. Some Tamil studies also point out that in pre-Vedic times, since the woman was considered all-powerful and she was very important for progeneration, she was also venerated. That is how temples those ancient days had been dedicated to women. The Amman temples in Tamil Nadu, or the Tamil deities presiding in a temple in Tamil Nadu, is a testimony to this, according to anthropologists. So when did patriarchy come into existence? It was during or after the Vedic times in India, and around the same time everywhere else that patriarchy got a stronghold. Researchers quote that Manusmriti had been mainly responsible for the derogatory position given to women in the post-Vedic period. In fact, Manusmriti suggests that women are to be considered lower than the Shudras. And Manusmriti says that women have no control over their emotions, so they should be subject to men during her childhood, the father and the brothers, and after her marriage, her husband and the boys had to take control of her. How very denigrating, isn't it? The Greeks also held such views, and they even went on to the extent of saying that though a man and a woman were needed to progenerate, it is the male who is dominant of the two, as the woman is a mere carrier of a man's seed which grows within her because he chooses to deposit it in her. I was appalled when I read this. How can they even think like this? Probably science wasn't that advanced, and so they thought it was only the man's seed that was responsible for a child to grow in a woman's womb. Such was the position of women in those days. This mindset, I believe, aided in establishing patriarchy. When patriarchy gained a strong foothold, the female deities in temples were either removed or placed beside male deities, and importance was given to the male deities. With this and other social changes and practices, women were put through painful treatments, a mindset that is carried on until now. Did women choose to suffer this quietly? History shows otherwise. Though there wasn't a collective upheaval, women stood up to challenge men in their respective fields. Though there is very little evidence of such organized protest against women being treated unfairly, in the 3rd century BCE, the Roman women filled the Capitol Hill and blocked every entrance to the Forum when Consul Marcus Porcius Cato resisted attempts to repeal his laws limiting women's use of expensive goods. In the early Vedic period, there are several mentions of female scholars like Lopamudra, Maitreyi, and Gargi. But Gargi was the one who stood up to the Vedic philosopher Yajnavalkya and questioned him about the Vedantas. At one point, Yajnavalkya was so dumbfounded that he had no words to answer her, and then warned that her head would fall off if she continued. When she failed to get the answer, she continued with her bold questioning. Much later, we find mention of Quiddida, who had a leg deformity, who ruled Kashmir with an iron hand for more than 4 decades in the 10th century. She had such political survival skills that she was ruling her kingdom with great stability. So she is known as the Catherine of Kashmir. Catherine, we know, she was a ruthless ruler of Russia. In the 17th century, Bibi Dalai Kaur, a Sikh woman, formed an all-woman army to fight the Mughal forces. Can you believe that? And it is also recorded that when one of the Mughal commanders, Wazir Khan, taunted her about the weakness of women in the battlefield, she had replied, "We are the hunters, not the hunted. Come forward and find out for yourself." How brave, isn't it? Also, we find mention of Rani Velu Nachiyar of Sivaganga, who ruled her kingdom for over a decade and led her kingdom's army in numerous battles, and even formed a special women's army named as Udayal after her daughter. After succeeding her father to the Kakatiya throne, Rani Rudrama Devi, at the age of 14, led several battles against the nobles in her kingdom who opposed her because she was a woman. Another mention should be made of Rani Chennamma of Kittur in Karnataka. She was the first Indian female ruler to lead an armed rebellion against the British East India Company. In the Maratha history, Tarabai of Kolhapur, Anubai of Ikalkaranji, and Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi are all well known for their skills, efficiency, diplomacy, and bravery in fighting against their rivals. But these were isolated cases, and women who rose up to prove their spirit found a place of their own in society and in history, though that came with much disdain and struggle. All that the women in those days were expected to do was to stay indoors and prove their virtuosity by being submissive to the dictates of patriarchy. Women who were loving, shy, and implicitly obedient to their husbands were considered to be virtuous. As an example to dutiful submission of a woman to her husband, people in Tamil Nadu cite the life of Vasugi, wife of Thiruvalluvar. Once when she was drawing water from a well, he had called her, and she left the vessel midway and ran to attend to him. It is said that the vessel hung there without falling into the well until she came back. This story was quoted to instill the value of sincerity and devotion of a wife to her husband. We find many such stories to make women timid, loving, humble, forgiving to their husbands' philanderings, chaste, peace-loving, and speaking kind words. All these qualities are found in all the highly praised heroines of literature to make women imbibe them. In many communities, the woman was forced to perform sati when her husband died. The widows of those days had to live an isolated life, was not allowed to wear good clothes, their heads had to be tonsured, and they could never appear in public spaces. Such was the miserable condition of most of the women, barring a few of whom we had seen earlier. And how did they come out of it? When did they choose to break from all these bonds? These questions will be answered in the following talks. Hope you find this podcast useful. If you do, please like and share it with others too. If you have not subscribed yet, please do so at the earliest. Thank you.